何かあったの？敏夫さんが。
わからない。
誰かって
もしかしたらここから逃げようとして熊か何かにやられたの。
熊？
Hey, welcome back! As always, when it comes to my route rankings, I'm gonna spoil pretty much everything that happens in the story, so if you are interested in playing Kamaitachi no Yoru Rinne Saisei and are curious as to what's about, I've done a non-spoiler review of sorts for the visual novel already, link at the top right corner and at the end. Think of this as a spoiler addendum to that video. For those sticking around, I'll give a quick basic rundown of Kamaitachi no Yoru just so everyone's on the same page. Kamaitachi no Yoru Rinne Saisei is a remake of a really old visual novel, or sound novel as Chunsoft calls it, made way back in 1994 on the Super Famicom. It was a Japanese-only release and helped pave the way for visual novels to become more popular in the general market, as while visual novels existed, they tended to be only on old PC architecture like PC-88 and PC-98. The basic premise is a ski lodge whodunit murder mystery where Toru and Mari go up to a ski lodge and deaths start happening. Once you beat that, you get access to a whole bunch of other side stories by exploring other choices. While this remake was also Japanese only, a fan translation came out late last year, which is what we'll be seeing here. The remake has a revamped soundtrack, art, 2 new routes, and voice acting. Kamaitachi no Yoru is famous for having a ton of different endings and routes, with this remake specifically having 47 different endings and 11 different routes. Just look at this ridiculous looking flowchart. Intimidating, right? But honestly, what I just said is more of a technicality than anything. The main story, the whodunit murder mystery, is definitely the longest of the 11, and a ton of the routes are just more ways to introduce weird gimmicks with the choose your own adventure format. The game has 47 different endings, but like 20 of those are located in one route and consist of picking one choice and then instantly dying, so they don't really count. This remake also adds in 2 new stories to experience, with one or both written by Ryukichi07, who of course is famous for Umineko and Higurashi. I don't know which one is written by him, but I do know Mary in Limbo has his fingerprints all over it, so I'm gonna guess that one, at least. While I will be ranking all of the routes, I will say there is a clear disparity between the top 5 and the bottom 6, since it's obvious that a lot more effort went into some of the routes while others are just the developers messing around. As in, some of the routes are like an hour long while the others are 2 minutes. So for the bottom 6, I'll be mostly judging based on how interesting I found their mechanics. Anywho, let's get started with number 11, the Snow Maze route. I'm gonna be blunt here. I don't like mazes in visual novels much, and that's what this entire route is. What do I mean by maze? Well, it's a thing in a visual novel where you are meant to make a bunch of navigation choices in a row, and until you find the exact correct set of decisions that will let you move on to the next part of the game, you are stuck in that area. Usually you're given a limited number of choices before the game just throws you into a bad ending, but the one in Kamaitachi no Yoru lets you take as long as you humanly want. I'm not a fan of mazes in visual novels because I end up feeling like they just exist to waste the player's time. At best, the maze is supposed to give a sense of urgency for the player as they frantically try to find the right answer before whatever time limit runs out. But in practice, I usually feel like I'm just scrambling around until I stumble upon the right answer. Some mazes have hints that'll help you solve the answer, but most of the time when it comes to VN ones, there is no real hint system. It's just keep on trying until it works out, I guess. The one in Kamaitachi no Yoru isn't even that bad in that it's kinda short, but that doesn't mean I enjoy doing it, and the ending is non-existent. It's just that Toru and Mari show up at the lodge after everyone's dead, and the killer will get them next. Oh no! Number 10, the Comedy of O route. This entire route revolves around the fact that Okamas are funny and weird, which, okay, I guess. The other joke is that the guy with a knife shows up and is obviously the killer, but everyone pretends like he isn't. Neither of these jokes are funny, and it ends with a kiss scene between the supposed murderer and Okama. Look, I like wacky stuff, but it has to be little more than just low random what humor. It's really dumb, and not even in a way that's entertaining. Number 9, Kamaitachi no Yoru. This route is 3 minutes long, and it's a metaphysical joke about how Toru and Mari end up realizing that they are playing a game with themselves as the main character, and it ends with a surreal loop of them trying to turn off the game. If this was extended into an actual route where they're trying to get past developer barriers and break the fourth wall, maybe something would be here. As it is, it's way too short. However, at the very least, I didn't feel annoyed while playing it, which puts it higher than the previous two. Number 8, the Cryptography route. The premise of this incredibly short route is that instead of finding the dead body in the main route, they find a treasure letter with a word puzzle. I do want to say, before anything, props to the translator who managed to translate this word puzzle into a legible format for this route. I imagine it took a little bit of messing around to make it work. I have no idea how close they stuck to the original text, but I imagine it's mostly the same. This route also has the whole nonsense of press Z in this incredibly specific place to get a secret ending where the author pretends that Chunsoft is actually a mind control facility or whatever, but I already saw that in 428 Shibuya Scramble, so I promptly skipped it. I imagine if you saw this in like 1994, it'd be a little bit scary maybe, because a game doing something like this would be much more surreal, but in current times, it's pretty weak. Number 7, Detective Mari route. The premise of this route is that it takes place right after the main route, except you get the ending where Toru acts like a complete wimp and Mari busts out a judo throw. Apparently, this awakens Mari's instincts and she decides to become a full-time detective. I do like Mari's turtleneck here, and man, what else do I gotta say about this route? There's technically a mystery to solve here. It's a fairly easy one, and even if you get it wrong, you can just try each answer until you get the right one, but it's still far better than any maze route nonsense. Number 6, the Labyrinth route, which is not to be confused with the Snow Maze route. What happens in this route is that Mari and Toru go into the basement, and there they find a wizardry-esque dungeon where they look for the box of happiness. The vast majority of the game's endings are crammed into this one route, as in there's a whole bunch of one-choice dead ends. It's probably the only route to really have a substantially different setting compared to the rest of the game, so that's a plus in its favor. Again, I think if this was something you played back in 1994, then this entire route would be a lot cooler as a concept, of suddenly running into this stock fantasy dungeon out of absolutely nowhere. Nowadays, I think this sudden genre shift has been done many times over and to much more interesting effect, as opposed to just being an incredibly short parody route. Still, the interactions between Mari and Toru in this route are fun enough, and it's probably one of the more lighthearted routes as a whole. Number 5, Novel route? Finally, we're moving on from the nonsensical stuff to some actual substantial routes. Granted, most of them are still under 1 hour, but at the very least there is some sort of story and time for things to actually happen, as opposed to just cracking a joke or two before a non-ending. This route doesn't really have a title and is one of the added scenarios for this remake called Novo. I'm going to assume that Yukishio 7 wrote both of them, because even though the other one I'm going to talk about has his fingerprints all over it, this one starts with the phrase question arc and ends with answer arc, which, you know, is a very Umineko Higurashi sort of thing to do. At its core, this route is basically another murder mystery, except this time there are no choices and you just get to chill and read until the end. For better or for worse, all the characters are quite a bit more tamer than they are in other routes, which is probably because someone else entirely wrote this one. It's not a bad mystery, but it's also not really an exciting mystery either. It's very normal. Out of the 5 actual routes, it's easily the weakest one. Number 4, Occult route. The Occult route is a tad bit more interesting, although I thought if you're gonna use actual supernatural elements in your story, you might as well have actually used the Kamaitachi, but I do get what they were going for. Anywho, I'm getting ahead of myself. The Occult route tackles the subject of, oh man, what if supernatural stuff was actually happening? Outside of the last route, I think this is the one that changes up the characters the most. People who normally would have been the villain in the main mystery route are now the hero, and the nice looking characters are instead keeping much darker secrets. It's not long enough to really expand upon any of the subjects it tackles, but it still tells a pretty classic revenge story overall. It's a spirit revenge story where the ski lodge is haunted by a ghost, which happens to be Mary's mother, who is married due to inheritance issues. We also get to see Mari in a bath towel, which is something, I guess. They also try to use the whole Kamaitachi idea with the evil spirit possessing Mari using her hairs like sickos. It's kind of a cop-out that in the big confrontation scene, all of it is shown off the reflection of Mari's eyes, which I assume they did because Mari is stark naked throughout the entirety of it, but come on. You could have slapped a bath towel on her and called it a day. The weakest part of the story is just about the same as all the rest of the routes, in that I feel like the ending feels really abrupt. They could have used a little bit more of an epilogue as opposed to just, the murder is solved, or the treasure is found, or the evil spirit is gone. Considering they go into how Kobayashi committed some terrible crimes, it would be nice to see justice actually get delivered against him, and a pretty basic happy ending with Mari and Toru moving on from the incident in some sort of way. Number 3, the mystery route. This is the main route of the game and is where the brunt of the playtime takes place. The vast majority of the CGs happen in this route as well. Now, everything I said in my non-spoiler video I'm gonna restate here again, but with more examples. I think everyone acts a little too stupid in this route, in the sense that I feel like someone watched a bunch of horror B movies and decided to try and copy every single thing that happens in them. It's like every character is walking into this situation. We are in a ski lodge in the middle of a blizzard, and attempting to make every possible decision that would get themselves killed. The worst part about this murder mystery is that I think everything is really predictable. It could be because this story is 28 years old by this point, as in the original came out in 1994, but I feel like you could see everything coming a mile away, and the fact that everything now has a CG might not have helped in that department either. For instance, you're quickly introduced to this silent Yakuza-like guy wearing sunglasses in the ski lodge, and the first thought I'm pretty sure everyone had was that, okay, if this man is dead first, then it's obviously gonna be the killer since you can't really see who he is, and he's not revealing his voice. Lo and behold, he ends up as the first victim. His death is found out by everyone hearing a window smash, and they find a dead body outside chopped up, which again, people can obviously tell is a time trick, because tying something to the snow falling and breaking a window is the oldest trick in the book. Toru then out of nowhere immediately starts suspecting Toshio as the actual killer, and he goes so hard into it that it's pretty obvious that it's a red herring, and if the killer actually was Toshio, that would be more surprising. If you didn't already have a good idea of who the killer was by the end of a single playthrough, you'll probably notice that while they show a gruesome CG death of every single character, when they show Mikitomo dead, Toru never checks anything beyond his code hand, which is insanely suspicious. I will say, it's entirely possible to have a wonderful visual novel without actually having a good mystery, if the story they are trying to tell is interesting on its own and the characters are fun to follow. The story is unfortunately though as bog standard as it gets, and the characters don't really pop in any sort of real way. Even though the game has a ton of different decisions and branching paths, as you can clearly see by this ridiculous looking flowchart, most of the decisions don't really matter in any real way. A lot of the flowchart decisions end up going back into the same path. It also really could have used an epilogue for at least a good ending of the story where everyone survives. As for what I actually like about this route, I think at times the script can be funny. When it's trying ridiculously hard to be wacky, it gets a little much, like this interaction between Marty and Toru in the beginning. However, when Toru busts out a big deduction and it completely falls on his head, it can make for a laugh. It's also cool that the game lets you play Toru as a complete loon, so if you keep on doing dumb stuff, eventually you'll die because of course if you pretend to be the murderer when someone actually dies, it's not gonna go well. Number 2, Mary in Limbo. Okay, so this is the route I assumed Ryukishio 7 had a hand in writing the first time I saw it, mostly because it has all of the hallmarks of his other works. For one, it's got a time loop theme going for it, and 2, it has that classic twist where everyone seems super normal and then bam, suddenly start cracking out and murdering people. The route does a good job being incredibly creepy. It's weird the first time you play it and you get drowned in a pool of blood in a ritualistic satanic sacrifice, and then the fact that it repeatedly happens in different ways. The central premise for this route is that essentially something happened and all of the characters aside from Toru are stuck in an endless loop which they can't leave. For one reason or another, it's obvious that the key to getting out has something to do with Mari, as everyone seems hyper-focused on making her happy, with the key to her happiness having to do with Toru. After running through the intro 3 times where it's impossible to get the right answer, eventually the inhabitants aside from Mari decide that this can't go on, and attempt to trick the main character into thinking that he's Toru, brainwashing him into all of Toru's habits based on what Mari wants. Alpha Toru, which is what I'm gonna call the main character of this route from now on, eventually finds out the truth that the reason the original Toru isn't here is because everyone died in a gas explosion with him as the only survivor. They were all supposed to move on to the afterlife, but because Mari suddenly realizes how much she loves Toru, which falls under the alright category, She basically holds everyone hostage until she can reunite with him. This route easily has the best Toru, mostly because the main character isn't the Toru present in every other route, but some other guy who happens to have the same name. This Toru is incredibly smart, resourceful, charming, and kind. It's thanks to his understanding as he's able to reach out to Mari, not pretend to be the Toru that Mari is looking for, but as himself who wants Mari to be happy for once, making her realize that perhaps what she desires isn't what she really wants. If Toru in most routes is meant to be an incompetent goofball with a heart of gold, then this Toru is like the Alpha Chad main character Toru. A lot of the route is a bit overblown, stuff like how Mari is tempted by the devil to create this time loop, or how heaven and the afterlife technically exists, the discussion of purgatory, how Mari learned to trap souls using her devil worshipping powers. Rather than all this being really cool, it instead comes off as a little nonsensical. Still, while it has a lot of moments that feel like they are going too hard on the paint, there are parts I can really appreciate. When Alpha Chad Toru is about to make Mari happy, he vanishes since he ends up coming back to life, and we get a nice perspective swap to Mari showing her feelings on the matter, which is a very nice section to have. We also get to see the other Mari, who is Alpha Toru's girlfriend, and Mari with short hair is an A+. I think the best part of this route is that we actually have a closing epilogue that gives the route a sense of closure, where Alpha Toru decides to find the original Toru, only to find out that sometime after the incident, Toru vanished, and we end on a scene of the two original characters meeting up again. The route as a whole is definitely a mess of ideas crammed into a single story, but I think the parts that make it unique do make it stand out from the rest of the other routes, so that's why it's number 2. And finally, at number 1, we have the Spy route. My favorite route of Kamaitachi no Yoru is the Spy route. To me, this route represents Kamaitachi no Yoru having the most fun it possibly can have, while actually having some sort of real plot and not being under 3 minutes long. This is probably the only route where I feel as if everyone has some sort of role in it, and this is especially with regards to Haruko, Kyoko, Midori, and 3 college students, Kanako, Aki, and Keiko, because basically every female character aside from Mari, I feel like in every route, ends up getting thrown to the wayside in that they end up doing absolutely nothing. Kanako at least does something, but Keiko and Aki, her 2 friends, might as well be cannon fodder for how much they do in every route. If they were 2 pieces of cardboard with red food dye spilled on them, they would be equally as relevant to the plot. The Spy route is the only one where everyone gets to have a little fun moment for themselves. The basic premise of the Spy route is that the Kamaitachi is not a mythical figure, but rather a code name for a secret spy that the Japanese government wants to get their hands on, and that every single person present in the ski lodge aside from Toru is a secret spy working for some country. It turns out a route can be pretty fun when everyone is a badass spy with military training. Mari knife chopping someone out of commission is great. How Haruko is packing a submachine gun, or Midori ends up as a final villain when normally she's the first character to get taken out, or how the route ends in a snowmobile chase with both groups shooting each other like it's an action thriller. Somehow, the whodunit murder mystery angle kind of works for this route, although it's less who killed the person and more like who is trustworthy, as Toru is thrown into this insane conflict between nations out of just random bad luck. Having tons of stupid choices to choose from also fits really well when Toru is already in such a crazy position. If he decides to not help Mari, then well yeah, she could just silence him instantly. It's not as if he's really bringing a lot to the table. This is even one of the only original routes to have some sort of ending, even as just the main characters laughing as they drive off into the sunset. It's not terribly long, it can be finished in about an hour, but it's definitely the most fun I had with Kamaitachi no Yoru as a whole. If I had to sum up my thoughts on Kamaitachi no Yoru Rinne Saisei, it would be that I think conceptually the visual novel is pretty interesting. Less in terms of the actual story behind the game, but rather how many different genres it tries to hop around to and how many different ways it tries to twist the visual novel choice mechanic. Even at the time it came out, I think there were more interesting visual novels coming out at the time, but in terms of one that was released on the Super Famicom, then yeah, this is definitely probably one of the only big ones to do so. The influence this game had can still be seen to this day if you played any Japanese murder mystery visual novel kind of game where they use real life actors. As a standalone story, however, I think there are much more interesting stories that are worth playing. If you want to experience a keystone of visual novel history, I suggest giving either Snatcher or PC98's a shot. If you want to talk about Kamaitachi no Yoru in any way, throw some fun facts about it, or any other legacy visual novels, feel free to tell me about them in the comment section below. All the supportive stuff, like, subscribe, notifications are in the same place as always, and I'll see you later. Till next time.